During my 17 months at the White House, I never saw any evidence that the president read the PDB. Despite what some advisors to the president have said, he does not consume as much intelligence as he should.
That's former National Security Advisor John Bolton, one of the many former top officials, saying the president simply doesn't read intelligence briefings, or he's so distracted it's impossible to even get his attention. All of this has gained renewed attention in the wake of reports that the Russians paid the Taliban to kill U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan. Well, my next guest, he wrote a piece recently in the Washington Post that digs into this, and the headline, well, it says it all. It's called Donald Trump, the Unbriefable President. I want to read a portion of it now. When news broke that the alleged Russian bounties were included in the presidential daily briefing, the Trump administration issued its usual denials and obfuscations. First, the president claimed the so-called reports were fake news. Then, he told Fox News that the intelligence was not credible enough to be in the PDB. Then the story changed again. If the intelligence was in the PDB, the White House said his briefer didn't bring it to Trump's attention. I want to bring in my guest now, the author of that piece, Chris Whipple. He's also the best-selling author. His new book called The Spy Masters, How the CIA Directors Shape History and the Future. And Chris, I want to kind of start from the beginning, in that we all know of the PDB, but talk about the principles that put together the PDB, the intelligence they gather it from, before it's ever in that final briefing and handed to the president.
Well, it's hard to overstate the importance of the PDB in keeping the president informed about threats. You know, the CIA director is the person we depend on to prevent another Pearl Harbor, a 9/11, a pandemic, and yes, plots against U.S. soldiers. But if the CIA director does not have the ear of the president, the entire enterprise is for naught.
Well, Chris, to put that in context, we've heard the argument from the presidents or his defenders, hey, there wasn't consensus here. If anything we learned from 9/11 was we didn't want to have different agencies stovepiping intel. We wanted everybody to have the benefit to know any threats against the United States, or certainly our armed forces, and for that to be shared and then put into a briefing. But to answer a question I think that a lot of people have, when people say, oh, there wasn't consensus on this, if people say that Martians are coming down on Friday to attack the United States, it's not going to be stuck in the briefing. It has to reach a certain threshold to be included in the briefing, and it has to be credible enough that it's taken seriously by agency heads. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. The reports seem to be credible that this plot against American soldiers by the Russians was reported in the President's Daily Brief, or PDB. So by definition, this was intelligence that was considered to be credible. And the fact that, frankly, that he's not reading the PDB is really an abdication of his first responsibility. I mean, what is the minimum we should be able to expect of a president?
And to that point, Chris, what I wanted to get my arms around was, because I'd say to my audience the same thing. If any of us were to sit at the most powerful desk in the free world, the least we owe to our fellow Americans is to read the document to at least know what the threats are to Americans. But beyond that, your piece goes into detail, and I would say embarrassing detail, the lengths that the briefers went to try and make the document consumable for this particular president. They tried to use pictures and graphs. They knew he wasn't going to read the briefing. They even tried to use landmarks, apparently, so that it would be enough to captivate his attention for more than a nanosecond, so at least he could get his arms around it. And then they even then proved unsuccessful. But it's not like they didn't try to read the room, if you will.
No, that's exactly right. And most presidents have a daily oral briefing. With this presidency, it is now as infrequent as once a week. And fundamentally, the larger problem is that this president does not believe anything the CIA tells him. And he also believes in his own delusional conspiracy theories, that there's a DNC server somewhere in the Ukraine. So it's a really fundamental problem that goes well beyond the momentary scandal of the Russian bounties.
Well, let's get to that latest story, because it is, and I spoke about this earlier this hour with Senator Booker, to me, the idea that when this report finally came to light, even after he said no one briefed him, which I find it incredulous that anyone would believe that, but nonetheless, it was in the briefing. He has yet to say the name Putin or the country Russia once, or even pledged to get to the bottom of it. So my question to you is, since we shouldn't hold out hope that all of a sudden he's going to find religion tomorrow and get to the bottom of this, how many people were in the loop that put this in the report together, that this won't just disappear into the ether, that whether the Senate Intel Committee or somebody is going to find out whether or not the Russians paid the Taliban to kill American troops, and at least there'll be some justice for those families who lost loved ones?
Yeah, I mean, it could hardly be more serious than the way you've outlined it. And the dereliction of duty here goes well beyond Donald Trump, in my opinion. I mean, you have to ask yourself, why didn't Robert O'Brien walk into the Oval Office, close the door behind him, and tell the president, you're talking to Putin about coming back into the G8. There are credible reports here that he's put a bounty on U.S. troops. O'Brien has to answer that question, in my opinion. And others, other high-ranking officials who got the PDB evidently also were afraid to confront Trump with these reports.
And add on top of that, we were in negotiations with the Taliban, including releasing Taliban prisoners. I mean, how in good conscience can you do that and advocate to reward the Russians when there's even the possibility that this is accurate? So again, I come back to it. If I can't hold out hope that I'm going to get an active president on this, where do I look as an American citizen for my government to try to find out if a foreign power went to a terrorist organization to kill, potentially successfully, multiple Americans? Where should we look to finally get to the bottom of this?
Well, I think you have to look to Congress. I mean, clearly, this is a White House where the top officials are afraid to walk into the Oval Office and tell the president what he does not want to hear. So you can't rely on the people around the president to get to the bottom of this. Congress has to look at this, in my opinion, and people have to be held accountable.
Well, it's a fascinating piece. Again, Donald Trump, the Unbriefable President. Go check it out in the Washington Post from this week. Chris, I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, ABC News political director Rick Klein. He'll join us with an inside look at the latest from the White House and also from the campaign trail, including the growing rift between the president and the scientists fighting COVID, including, yes, Dr. Fauci.